continue with that. Here we go.
Woohoo! Can't wait. Oh, yeah! My dancing
Great. So good morning, everybody once again. Apologies for the technical difficulties. Still, it looks like I'm trying to figure Clubhouse because the new things, the new format seems a kind of difficult. But okay, at some point we'll be okay with it. So again, this is Japan Expert Insights, Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley, CEO of Langley Esquire, and me, Maya Matsuoka, as a host. Thank you very much for joining us. Timothy, without any further ado, let's start. I know that you're not in Tokyo, but let's go with it a little bit later.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Maya, let me just give you a view of where I am right now.
Okay.
Those of you that are watching on LinkedIn, I am tied up to the pier or to the dock in Habu Harbor, which is a collapsed volcano on the island of Oshima. So Evan Burkowski and I sailed here yesterday, 14 hours sailing, and we are now safely tied up as gale force winds are pounding outside the harbor. And we have to stay here until the storm passes, so that'll be all day today. So during my briefing, I apologize. You will see some rocking of the boat. You'll hear some waves crashing up against us. But that's kind of the situation we're in right now. But I always look forward to having this briefing. Maya, this is 116 episode.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much for the persistence, the consistency, for everything, and doing it even from Habo.
Yes. Can you notice I got some sun yesterday?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. So we set sail at 3:30, 4 o'clock yesterday morning, and sailed all day and got here at about 7 o'clock last night. So I'm very happy to be here and talking to you rather than floating in the water someplace with my life jacket on.
Well, I'm definitely happy that you are in Habo on the boat still. Great. Okay, so shall we start?
Sure, let's go. So I'm going to clip this. I found this on the web. Here we go.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so there might be a little bit of rocking and rolling here. And I apologize, but let's get right to it. So good morning, everybody. 116 episodes in a row right here. Thanks to you, Maya Matsuoka, and Japan Expert Insights for creating the platform and for giving me this opportunity to talk about what I do in Japan and what's going on in Japanese politics. Thank you very much. Today is April 30th. It's the last day of the month. Tomorrow is May. My gosh, we're just really starting to steam forward. And as I told you in our last episode, that things will really start to pick up politically now that the elections are past us. But there's a lot going on geopolitically. There's a lot going on with Japan regionally as well. And then the Prime Minister is gearing up for potentially another election of the lower house, but we're going to analyze that a little bit better. But Mr. Kishida and South Korea are beginning to forge closer relationships and closer ties. The president of South Korea was in Washington, D.C. for 5 days just this last week. They made some significant progress and some announcements there that I'd like to get into. Ron DeSantis, potentially the candidate from the Republicans for the president of the United States to run against Joe Biden, visited Tokyo. He was here for 2 days on a 4-nation tour. So he came to Japan, he's on his way to Israel and then the United Kingdom. And it's somewhat significant that he visited Japan. I think many contenders come to Japan as a kind of a stamp of approval or to show that they have international acumen and chops. But there, I believe there was the Southeastern Governors Conference that was in Japan as well, because the ambassador to Japan was busy greeting governors and making presentations there. And probably DeSantis was here as a component of that, but he's also working on his candidacy for presidency. Can you hear that announcement in the background, Maya?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I can hear that.
Sorry for the disruption. It sounds like the Coast Guard is just announcing the rough seas and advising people to stay in harbor.
Oh, it's good that we're not after you, actually.
Maybe that's the announcement to come later. So I apologize for the background noise. And also, by the way, Maya, COVID is over. Did you know that?
Oh, I heard the news. Yes.
That's right.
Yes, we lived to hear it.
Yes. So as of yesterday, regulations and restrictions on international travelers coming into Japan was stopped. It was ceased. You don't have to show that you've got 3 COVID shots and that you're wearing a mask and that you wash your hands. So that's for international visitors, and that those rules and regulations also apply to inside Japan too. So whether you have a graduation ceremony or a school outing, you're not required to be wearing masks nowadays, even in restaurants. So that's a great move forward. In light of Japan wanting to increase their population, it is somewhat noteworthy that the Ministry of Health just passed authorization for an abortion pill on Friday's hearings. So it's somewhat curious, but there are a lot of abortions here. It is one of the major ways for people to keep the population or down, and so there's a hefty business in abortion. So this is a new device, a new medical procedure in 2 pills that are taken within a couple of days of each other, and it works, I think, probably within 9 to 10 weeks of gestation. So it looks like that's going to hit the market and maybe hurt the Prime Minister's chances for beefing up the population. The Japanese also passed a new defense agreement dealing with Russia and China. They published that in a meeting on Friday, dealing with the aggressive incursions from China into Japanese disputed territories, and also the joint maneuvers held by China and Russia as they've come into the Japan Sea in something that could be termed as somewhat an aggressive stance. So they're starting to beef that up. The Fukushima water release is still on schedule. There will be some news coming out, but the reports are coming up pretty furiously. So Japan's neighbors are beginning to tighten up their opposition to that with regard to trade in fish and agricultural products. So there's still a lot of fight left in that. On the heels of that, it seems as if the avian flu has also hit Japan. It is beginning to make its presence felt, and that means that eggs and poultry are going to be affected as a result. In our last briefing, Maya, somebody asked the question about AI, and so we should talk about that before our briefing finishes up today. And
Yes.
finally, last Saturday, there was a big festival of LGBT. Maybe 200,000 people participated in Yoyogi and also demonstrated in front of the Diet for legislation dealing with same-sex marriages. Many municipalities in Japan already recognize same-sex marriages. There was a visa that was just issued this last week for a foreigner coming in on a long-term visa who is married to a Japanese national. So that's a first too. And the legislation is being considered right now, as many people know, Japan is a laggard in terms of recognizing same-sex marriages and liberalization of LGBT rights. And that legislation is before the diet now. There is a big push, and I think it coincided with the protests last week, for Japan to pass legislation, national legislation, to recognize that. But as before, there is a contingent within the LDP that is opposed to that. So whether they're going to be able to succeed in passing the legislation, many people want it done in time for G7. G7 is in less than 3 weeks. So it looks like it might be a contentious issue. It is a contentious issue. It looks like, well, it's a little bit too early to call. But with that as a background, let's get right into the briefing today with Mr. Kishida. He has been really on a roll. I want to talk about elections as well, but let's talk about what's going on with Mr. Kishida first of all. So you might have noticed the flag flying looking very much like a Japanese flag with a green background and a red sun. That is the national flag of Bangladesh. So the Bangladeshis had a state visit this last week, I think Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So flags were flying around Tokyo and around the Diet compound. You might have noticed that. But the Prime Minister is busy receiving visitors and participating in a lot of state visits, as is normal. He is just always on the run. He's going to visit Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, and Mozambique this next week, I think, probably departing next week for the four-nation tour. There is a conference in Tunisia on African development. This is important for Japan because up until now, the Chinese have been very much dedicated to developing China with their Belt and Road Initiative, and Japan has kind of slinked back, especially during COVID. So there was their foreign direct investment. Japan is very famous in terms of practicing diplomacy and policy by investing, by foreign direct investment in projects throughout the world. In 2016, they invested throughout all of Africa about 10 billion US dollars, and that fell to 4.7 billion in 2020. Last year, it improved just a bit to 6.8 billion, but this is only of all of the money that Japan devotes to investing internationally. Africa, the entire continent of Africa, receives 0.003% of Japanese foreign direct investment. So this is going to change pretty drastically. Apparently, this is part of the strategy of getting like-minded countries together to band together against this initiative that's been going on for quite a while from China, the Belt and Road Initiative, but also in terms of combating the alliances that seem to be building between Russia and China. This initiative is pretty much motored by the United States, and it is all-encompassing. President Biden will be receiving, I think, 20 members of the South Island nations in a conference sometime. Oh, it's after G7. So he's very busy. He's going to visit not only Hiroshima, and then from there, it looks like he'll be going for the Quad in Australia, and then also visit with the 27 members of the island nations countries. So these nations have typically, since World War II, been somewhat of a diplomatic backwater. They haven't been that important. China has identified them as places to invest in large projects for fisheries and port facilities, and they've been making significant inroads. And so finally, the United States and Japan and several other countries are getting together to combat that by coming up with their own initiatives and their own direct investment opportunities. Also on Friday, Japan wanted to clarify its stance with regard to potential aggression, excuse me, by China, by North Korea, by even Russia against Japan and what Japan considers to be its allies. So any attack on Japan would be included as any attack on an ally in Japan's regional sphere would be considered an attack on Japan, and thus trigger several developments within the SDF, the self-defense forces, as well. We've reported on it before, as you know, with Japan boosting GDP, 2% of GDP to defense spending. It also included a kind of a absorption of the Coast Guard, the Japanese Coast Guard, which is a separate entity managed by a separate ministry. It seems that that assumption by the Defense Department is going to go forward, and they dealt with that on Friday. The Minister of Defense talked about his abilities now to overtake Coast Guard assets in the case of a potential threat. And there's a lot going on with North Korea and their opposition to the President Yoon and Joe Biden meeting this last week, where the United States pretty much guaranteed the defense of South Korea, and Korea pretty much guaranteed that it's not going to pursue nuclear development, nuclear arms development. You might remember that as North Korea began to ramp up earlier this year, there was talk that if the United States was not going to be basing more forces around there, that South Korea might be considering developing its own nuclear facilities, and that sent shockwaves through the Defense Department in the United States. And so apparently they've made some sort of an acclamation for protecting South Korea in light of North Korea's threats. And the threats have increased. You might have seen that our great leader, Kim Jong-un's sister, made some comments this last week following up on the trip of President Yoon in the United States, who also sang apparently American apple pie in a song to Joe Biden, which he liked very much. So that was played up pretty heavily. The new basic plan on ocean policy passed through the cabinet this week, and basically it is geared toward addressing Chinese and Russian intrusions into Japanese waters and in preparation of potential launches by North Korea. So North Korea also said last week that it wants to put a spy satellite in the air so that it can monitor developments, and Japan is interpreting that as incredibly hostile. So they're developing other defense capabilities, rocketry, to shoot these kinds of things out of the sky. There was a report this last Monday about Japan's inability to actually achieve that. If North Korea does shoot a spy satellite up, it would be the first time for them to put into geostationary orbit a spy satellite, but it looks like that they're going in that direction. And once again, with G7 coming up on the 19th of this month, it is about time for the North Koreans to showcase another one of their abilities. We're awaiting that, and I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later, and probably during G7. It seems like a pregnant time for Kim Jong-un to flex his muscles and to make sure everybody knows that he's here. Also, we reported on the Astellas Pharma employee who was captured for espionage in China. The foreign minister, Hayashi, visited China maybe 2 weeks ago to talk about a lot of different things. And one of them was to gain the release of this employee, this Japanese employee for the pharmaceutical company. And that was unsuccessful. The new ambassador from China to Japan also reiterated China's claim that it's not going to tolerate anybody spying in China, and also said that he wanted good relations with Japan, and he was looking forward to that. And he didn't consider Japan to be an enemy state, which is kind of just voicing that is scary enough. But apparently the The Chinese are watching this situation very carefully. It's a delicate time. I don't know many of the details about the pharmaceutical employee, but it doesn't look like he's going to be released anytime soon. Let's talk a little bit about this election that just happened last Sunday. The LDP, as you all know, I think there were three components of the election: phase one and phase two. Phase two had two different components. Phase one was governors in 9 prefectures and mayors in several important big cities. And then phase two was municipal elections plus mayors in other municipalities, plus 4 lower house seats, which were vacated because of death or resignation, and 1 upper house seat. So all of that happened on phase two this last Sunday. The LDP was predicted to do well because number one, they hold a commanding lead in most of the houses. They have a coalition arrangement with Komeito. So between the two of them, they usually sweep in and win at least on par with what they did before. And the pundits were saying if the LDP won at least 3 of the 5 diet seats that were up, that would be considered a victory. They won 4 of the 5, but they did lose 1 to Isshin, and that's a big shakeup. Isshin did incredibly well this last election, better than the Constitutional Democratic Party, which is currently the main opposition party. So the Isshin party, the party from Osaka, is really beginning to be on a roll. Mr. Baba, who is the leader of Isshin, claimed that if they didn't win 600 seats, he would resign. They exceeded 600 seats, so he's still in position. And plus, they picked up a governorship in neighboring Wakayama, and also both houses in Osaka, and the mayor's role, the mayor's position, and the governor's position, as expected in Osaka. So they're really on a roll. But let's talk a little bit about what this might mean for Japanese democracy and for the LDP and for what else is going on. So the big issues to talk about are the big diet seats. That is important because that's where most of the juice is. So there were 5 diet seats. 4 of them were in the lower house. So I'd like to talk about those 4 in the lower house. There was Wakayama, there's 2 in Yamaguchi, and there's 1 in Chiba. So the 2 in Yamaguchi are pretty easy to dispense with. One was held by Mr. Abe, who was assassinated. And the election for that seat is pretty much a 1-term seat, because the next time there's an election for Yamaguchi number 2, that election district will have dissolved because of 1010, the gerrymandering, which goes into effect. So this was won by Mr. Yoshida Shinji. There was only 2 real contenders, another contender from the Constitutional Democratic Party. It was not much of a close race because this is Mr. Abe's territory, and Mr. Abe's wife was supporting the candidate from the LDP, and also the Prime Minister went down a couple of times to support him as well. In the second seat in Yamaguchi was by the eldest son of Mr. Kishi, who is Abe's brother, younger brother, and his eldest son ran, and he won, fortunately for the LDP, but the number of votes that he won by was pretty slim. I think he won by 5,700 votes. So that's a pretty narrow margin for that political district. But the LDP squeaked by. Wakayama was a surprise. This was won by Isshin, and the reason why it was won by Isshin was because the LDP promoted 2 candidates for that position. They couldn't settle on one. So it's a huge controversy. It's a big black eye for the LDP. It is somewhat reminiscent of the governor's race that was lost by the LDP because the LDP promoted two candidates and Isshin took that governorship. Similarly, in Wakayama, there were several candidates for from the LDP, and Isshin was able to come in and sweep that up. The LDP candidate was supported by Nikai and Mr. Seko, who is in the upper house and one of the top contenders for leadership in the Abe faction. But the Isshin did pretty darn well. The number of votes between first place and second place is somewhat dramatic, 61,720 versus 55,657. So splitting the vote and not getting your act together is an opportunity for Isshin to come in. So I think moving forward, you're going to see Isshin playing a lot more on this tactic. With Chiba, Isshin also had a candidate there, and the LDP wanted to keep this seat. This seat was held by a former LDP member who had to resign because of his loose use of campaign contributions. And it's interesting to go into Chiba a little bit, so I want to talk about that if you don't mind. In the last election, so the fellow who resigned because of campaign financing, his name was Sono Ura Kentaro, and he won that election by receiving about 46% of the vote there. His next contender, the person who came in second, was from the Constitutional Democratic Party, who got 29% of the vote. Isshin ran a candidate. He received 13%, and the Democratic People's Party received 10%. That was 4 years ago. So in the elections today, the LDP came in, but because of pretty much voter apathy, which is all over the country, the votes that were cast this year for the municipal elections were down. The number of people who were running for election unopposed was up. So they're not getting as many candidates, and also the candidates who hold the position usually stay there unopposed. So this year, the candidate who won was from the LDP, supported by the LDP. She won 30% of the vote, and the Constitutional Democratic Party won 27% of the vote, compared to the last time they lost by 29%. The Democratic People's Party won 15%, and Isshin won 13%. So Isshin received 13% of the vote, the same percentage as the last time they won. This was with a field of 7 candidates. He came in with 13% of the vote, which is pretty remarkable given the fact that he was a first-termer and 28 years old. But the important part is that this candidate from the LDP is, she's a nationalized Japanese citizen with an Uyghur father and an Uzbeki mother. And the number of votes that she got, the 30% that she got, amounted to about 50,000 votes, which means that if the opposition party had gotten their act together and combined to form a single candidate, they would have won by far because they had more than 60% of the votes there. She won with 30%. So it's just the competition for a power base that splits the vote, and it means that a candidate with 30% can win. That happens pretty frequently. It's not a majority of the voters, but when they have more than one candidate, it does split the vote. And that's why it's important when you see in many of these races, Komeito doesn't provide a candidate. They've got an arrangement with the LDP where they say in those areas where we're not really very strong, we will instruct our Komeito members to vote LDP. Except we want you to support us in those areas that we are stronger, where we're in a contentious battle, and maybe don't run an LDP candidate so that and instruct your voters to please vote for Komeito. It doesn't work as often when it's the LDP that's going to benefit, but it does work when Komeito wants to benefit. So we see cracks in that. So the flow is that Komeito and the LDP are not really as together as they once were in terms of vote getting. So the way it stands right now, the LDP was predicted to win 3 of these 5 seats. They won 4 of the 5 seats. They lost Wakayama to Isshin, and all of the other votes that they were able to get were just squeaky. Clearly with Yamaguchi, it's an LDP stronghold. They should have won both of those, but even in that case, it's not very dramatic, and it doesn't say, we are voting for the LDP because Mr. Kishida is doing a great job. The outcome of the elections, I think, also were closely watched by the Prime Minister, obviously, because in our last briefing, we were talking about, if the results are strong, the Prime Minister could possibly close down the lower house after G7. It didn't take the Prime Minister long. In fact, on Monday, he announced he's not really thinking about closing down the lower house after G7, which is pretty much, well, on the one hand, the Prime Minister is never going to say he's going to close down the house until he actually does it. So it could be a ploy to put people off and keep them off balance because, the timing is so important. You can put your forces in play before any of the opposition can and be ready for it and then call the election. The election, once it's called, would happen within 2 weeks. It's not immediate, but it would happen within 2 weeks. And you would have a significant advantage. Apparently, the Prime Minister also doesn't feel like the last election was a true endorsement of the LDP or of his policies. And once again, I apologize for the rocking of the boat. If you're getting seasick, maybe just stay with the clubhouse briefing. So let's see, where are we? The other thing I wanted to give you an update on is the standing of the LDP factions. So LDP factions are important because it's a one party, but it's controlled by several factions. And there has been some movement there. And this movement indicates that we are on the cusp of greater movement. So the last time we talked about the forces within the LDP that control things, Mr. Abe's faction, Seiwakai, had 96 members. It now stands at 100 members. It's 3 digits. So that's a big deal. 3 digits for the political faction within the LDP is pretty significant. The number 2 is no longer Motegi. The last time we were talking, it was Motegi and Aso, which means they had basically the same number of members. Mr. Aso has come up one. He now has 55 members in his political faction. Motegi stays at 54. Mr. Kishida has received a couple of more party members or faction members. He's now at 46. The last time we reported, he was at 43. Mr. Nikai lost one. He's now at 41. And the Moriyama faction is at 7. So the reason why this is important once again is because the numbers that you hold as a faction leader pretty much dictates how much power you have in other policy areas and certainly within appointments to the cabinet or committee seats. So with this last election, there is some navel gazing to be done because of what happened with the governor's race in Wakayama and also the confusion that was caused between Mr. Seko and Mr. Nikai with supporting their candidate who actually lost. So, these are just tea leaves, but they are indicative of other things that are coming up. So my guess is things will be positive and building until G7. And then after G7, there will be a lot of political realignment. I don't know about a snap election. It doesn't look like things are building in the Prime Minister's favor, but you never know. I mean, G7 is expected to go off extremely well. It should, because they're putting that much time and effort into it. So the Prime Minister wants to maintain being Prime Minister. There's little on the political calendar that dictates he should or must do something. So I think he'll take that opportunity to bolster his image and get more votes. it's anybody's guess, but it's a good idea to keep tuned to this briefing so that we can keep you appraised of it. The other thing I want to talk about is South Korea. So as you know, President Yoon visited the United States. He was there for 5 days. That's a pretty significant period of time. He's not universally loved within South Korean politics. He became president by the skin of his teeth, and he's got a very vocal opposition party. So what he does is carefully watched and highly critical and criticized. So he made a statement while he was in the United States, I think maybe on Thursday, in one of the speeches that he was having. He had already left Washington, D.C., that, in his view, it is not necessary for Japan to bend the knee in apology to South Korea. This has been going on long enough. Japan doesn't need to do that. And immediately he received a huge backlash in South Korea, the voters in South Korea. So, no matter what you say, you're going to be criticized for it. But I think what he's trying to do really hard is to mend the fences between South Korea and Japan. It's very important to the United States for him to do that, and it's important for the unity of like-minded countries in defending against what's going on. It's particularly in China, but also with North Korea and with Russia as well. So there's a lot of effort and energy going on there, and you can see more of it. Japan also delisted South Korea as a nation where trade favorability was minus, and to put them back on the most favored trade nation. That's a big deal, and I'm sure that was gained after several concessions. And also, it's nice to hear that Mr. Kishida is going to visit South Korea. So this is something that's kind of new. It looks like it'll be happening next week. By the time we have our next briefing, I think he will be in South Korea. So this will be the first time for a Japanese prime minister to visit South Korea in 5 years. The previous administration was very anti-Japanese and anti-Japan. So there were trade frictions. There was a problem with selling computer parts and computer manufacturing devices and also chemicals to Japan. To South Korea. So there was a lot of friction going on there. So hopefully this is behind us and we're moving into new territory. The other thing that we wanted to talk about, Maya, is the AI revolution that's going on, and Japan picking up on that. So you might have heard the big news that ChatGPT, the president, visited Japan 2 weeks ago and is thinking of setting up an office here. ChatGPT is really an epochal change in technology, and the Japanese are finally taking note of that. They produced a white paper from the LDP headquarters just this last week. It was reported on widely in the press. My company did an analysis on it, and there is an English translation of the white paper that was produced just this last week. The title of the paper is The AI White Paper, Japan's National Strategy in the New Era of AI. It is a pretty thorough document, 25 pages. If you would like a copy of it and you can't find it on the internet, please write to me at timothy@langleyesquire.com and I'll make sure that you get a copy of it. And alternatively, you can receive the analysis that my team produced on that by subscribing to the newsletter that we produce once or twice a month, given what's going on in the area. So the Japanese are really taking note of this. They understand that Japan is behind the times. I think many people would say kind of as usual, but it needs to come up to speed as is the United States and Europe, and they need to adopt these AI technologies. And so that's why you see this increased push. They have identified AI as something that they really need to embrace and take care of. The possible challenges that they want to address are authentication, the information that comes across as authentic but could be fake. It's AI addresses that and includes images, deep fakes, and videos, that sort of thing. So they're trying to prevent that, the threat to cybersecurity that it produces, and the technical implementation gap between Japan and the United States. It's kind of like a trade advantage that Europe and the United States has. The Japanese don't want to be caught, unprepared. So they have decided that this is an area that they're really going to start putting a lot of energy into. So the main suggestions contained in the document, the white paper that was produced, is that Japan should analyze the policies existing in the United States, the European Union, and in China, including the following risk categories utilized in international legal discussion: risks that violate human rights, health and safety, national security risks, and the risk of undue intervention in the democratic process. So you can see this happening throughout the world, and Japan wants to be on top of it so that it doesn't suffer from it, but it's also not criticized from suffering from it. And in usual Japanese fashion, there's more fear and risk aversion in their policy implementation. So the first part of their white paper document is talking about the risk associated, how they're going to avoid those risks, but take the benefit that AI produces. And then the document concludes with the implementation of investments in AI in the public and private sector and the foundational AI models to be used, which is probably one of the reasons why the president of the company was visiting Japan and visited with the prime minister, in fact, and public and private sharing of data through AI, and just a couple of pilot projects that will be supported and funded by the Japanese government. So look forward to a lot of different things coming out on that. And I think, Maya, let me recheck my notes. I think that's the end of my briefing. If I've gone over, I apologize. But yes, that's it for today as the boat rocks back and forth. You didn't get seasick, did you?
Not yet, but if you had continued, for another 5 minutes, maybe I would have. So, right, but thank you for the briefing. And I can see a bit of that beautiful scenery behind you. How nice. Yes.
See how choppy
Okay.
the water is. My gosh.
I can see that. And you're in the port, aren't
Yes.
you? Wow. Well, hopefully the storm will pass and you'll get, some good weather to sail back wherever it is, I don't know whether you're coming back to Tokyo or you're going to...
No, this is the first leg. This is the beginning. So
wow.
Next 7 days we'll be out on the water and visiting outstretched islands.
Great. That sounds great. Well, thank you. So let's move to Clubhouse and, continue there with the questions and answers so that, Timothy, by the way, yes, if you join, probably you can find us by clicking on Japan Expert Insights there. And from there, I think that you will find easily this room. So it has no title at the moment. I'm sorry, because I had to open it just before, we started.
Okay. I'll get right over there. Thank you, Maya. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Timothy. Great. See you there. Well, thank you very much to everybody who watched us. Apologies for the technical difficulties early on. We'll be here once again on Sunday next week, 8:20, live streaming from Tokyo, once again, talking about Japanese politics and what is important for you to know if you live and work in Japan or if you do business with Japan. So if you find this content helpful, useful, please share it or tell your friends and colleagues that we do these sessions weekly on Sunday morning Japan time. Thank you very much indeed. We're looking forward to seeing you again here. Thank you. Bye.